Welcome to my session. My name is Tietze. I work for SentinelOne as the Director of Security Strategy EMEA. Welcome to Minimising. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I hope the next 20 minutes will be worthwhile for you as they will be for me. I'll be talking to you today about minimizing risk from cyber threats and focusing on reducing time to containment. There's a lot of things we can do and are tasked with doing in our roles on a daily basis. But I think that there are certain objectives that we need to keep in mind at all times. And to bring us all on the same page, I wanted to start by quickly recapping what we're talking about. And I think one of the things that we're tasked with every day is incidents and handling incidents. And to recap what an incident is, it's any adverse event that negatively impacts any of the three confidentiality, integrity, and availability goals of cybersecurity. That means that they can negatively affect information that is being processed, or the storage of it, or the transmission of it, but basically using digital assets or computers, as they said in 2004. I think today we have mobile phones and we have all sorts of other devices and tablets. That's basically compute assets. And in many organizations, there's actually not just confidentiality, integrity, and availability as the goals of cybersecurity, but there's also safety. If you think of a hydroelectric dam, if you think of a factory, if you think of a power plant or an oil drilling operation, then all of those have aspects that affect public safety, and that is a key aspect of it. So that's a goal of information security as well, to protect the safety of workers, to protect the safety of the public and other affected parties. And then there's many different kinds of exposures that affect how well these goals can be achieved or protected. These exposures come in many forms. They start with things like espionage coming from nation states. They go on with cybercrime, things like CEO fraud, information warfare that can affect what your employees think and how they act, or what your leadership thinks and how they act. There's things like ransomware that we're all very aware of, cyber terrorism and hacktivism. There can be things like coin miners that abuse resources. So there's lots of different motives for attackers now to basically attack the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your compute assets. But they all boil down as attacking some of these goals. And that means there's risk. And risk is the exposure to danger, and it can be quantified. And everybody, I think, is aware in our profession of what a risk function is. So I'll just quickly recap. You can quantify it as an expected loss. So basically, if you operate a compute asset, you will have a cost of that asset in an incident of a particular sort. And then you will have a number of these assets, so you can multiply it with that. And then you will have a frequency at which it occurs. How often does it occur? What is the probability of a particular asset being involved in such an incident? And then you create the sum across all of the different asset classes and types of risks that you have, and then you know what your total expected loss is in a year from cybercrime and from any risks to the CIA goals. And then you have ways of dealing with the risk. So you can deal with it by doing avoidance. So you can avoid the risk, which means you're just not doing a particular business function. That's not for us to talk about. That's really an accounting and business decision if you want to avoid the risk altogether. You can mitigate it, which means that you can minimize, for instance, the impact. So you can minimize the cost of the asset in the incident. Or you could minimize the attack surface by minimizing, for instance, the number of those assets. Or you can minimize the incident probability, the frequency per year at which it occurs. So that's what you have available to you for mitigation. That's really what we focus on in our profession in cybersecurity. There's also transfer. That's something that you can do. You can like outsource the risk to someone else, make it somebody else's liability by putting it in a different company that is a limited liability company, or offshoring it to some other company that you can sue in case that there's an issue. Of course, you need to be able to also recover the money in that case, which can be costly and difficult. Or you can choose to just accept the risk. There's a residual risk that we always need to accept, and that just comes with the business that we're doing. but that needs to be at an acceptable size, an acceptable annual and total amount as well. So that's risk, and that's quite well understood. And what we do when we have incidents that are the result of risk, that basically manifest as an incident, we respond to the incident. And we do that with a practice that we all call incident response. So that's the practice of systematically handling computer security incidents according to a systematic and prepared methodology. So we have covered what incidents are, we have covered what risk is, we have covered now, or starting to cover, what incident response is. And the key pieces are it's systematic and prepared, and it's handling of that incident. An incident response comes in phases. So every incident that you work on that occurs in your organization has 3 global phases. There's an incident pre-incident phase, so that whatever happens before the incident starts, and that's when you do things like minimizing the risk. You also prepare your incident response plan. You educate people, etc. So that's when you prepare for the incident to occur, or you work on mitigating and avoiding the incident altogether. And then there's the peri-incident phase, and that's what we're going to focus on in the next 15 or so minutes, and that's what you do during the incident. So from the moment that it occurs until you identify that it has occurred or is ongoing, until you work on containment and responding to the incident, and then cleaning up afterwards and recovering. And then when you're done, there's the post-incident phase in which you can improve your process, improve your protections based on the lessons that you learned. And that's what you feed back into the pre-incident preparation, because you may change how you prepare, you may change configuration, you may have identified a gap in your defenses, so there's lessons learned to work on. That's all in a SANS white paper from 2020. But this is a repeatable process, and peri-incident is really what occurs, of course, the most in an organization, because that's the ongoing practice that cyber defense centers and SOCs deal with. It's responding to those incidents. And the end-to-end time to contain, that's the time from the incident occurring until you're done with the cleanup. And that's really a very critical phase, a really critical metric in my eyes, because that is the one thing that basically determines what the impact is. If you stop it within the first few milliseconds of its occurrence, then the impact will be less than if you let it continue for 100 days. So identifying it early and also working on the containment very early and very quickly and effectively, that's key to actually containing the incident. And that's key to the objectives that we have in protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of compute assets. So time to contain is really what I like to focus on. It's the time to regain the full control of all the affected assets, and then to restore the trustworthiness of those information assets. So you go back to a trusted state, from having it compromised to a trusted state. And minimizing that time to contain, that's key to effective protection. So when we decompose that time to contain that occurs during an incident, here's what it can look like. This is a phased model. It's not mine. I'll talk about it later. So something occurs in the beginning. The compromise happens, the attack happens, somebody gains access. Then you need to first detect that that has occurred. That's the first thing that needs to happen for all of the other things to be able to take place. Then you may be able to enact automatic responses, which is potentially very fast because it's automatic. You will need to alert your staff. You will need to identify what's going on, investigate what occurred during the incident, then manually respond to it, and then in the end verify that containment has been successful, and that brings you to the containment phase. And there's many different metrics that you can consider to be critical. There are things like the number of assets that are affected, the internal visibility, so the damage to your IT department's reputation, for instance, and damage to the CISO, potentially, the external visibility, which is direct damage to business, then the cost that you spend on preparedness, the total cost of the incident, So there's lots of different metrics. But when you look how those metrics relate, then they're all in one way or another related to the time it takes you to contain an incident that occurs. You will never be down to 0 incidents. At least that's what I believe. I don't think that's very controversial, but I don't think that we're going to get to 0 incidents. So for the remaining incidents that we need to mitigate, all of these metrics are related to the time it takes to contain the incidents. And some of those are more directly related, like the number of tools and the number of people that are involved in the incident response may be very directly related to it. There are some things that are maybe less directly related, but time to contain is ultimately that metric. So that's why I think of it as the critical metric, and the way to optimize it is to optimize every single step in the incident response along the way. So when you look at that phased model of what goes on after the incident starts, you start with the detection. So that's the time spent for a system to understand after the attack has started or the compromise has started that a malicious activity has been going on. And weaker approaches, I think, are the ones that rely on humans for detection. So they rely on humans to actually notice something, report something, find something, whether they're actively looking for it, like threat hunting, or whether they are relying on users to report suspicious behavior. That takes minutes, seconds, days, weeks. When you look at the Ponemon Institute study from 2018, it took 197 days as the mean time to detect a breach. That's a pretty long period and definitely not desirable. But when you look at automated detection systems, and EDR, endpoint detection and response, since 2012 has had a great impact on reducing those numbers, then there are even differences there. Some require a round trip to the cloud, which adds hundreds of milliseconds of latency. Now, milliseconds aren't that bad. Some will just ship the data to the cloud, and then you will look at it in the cloud, and a human needs to make a decision, or there needs to be an active query, which takes you to minutes or even hours of time to detect. So I think we can agree that the stronger approaches are the ones that are programmatic and automatic, the ones that are based on the endpoint, so that there's no shipping of telemetry involved, that there's no need for a human to look at it in order to create a detection, and that are completely autonomously acting, so that there's no need to have prior knowledge of a threat in order to detect it. Because that really requires somebody to already have been hit, so that that knowledge, in the form of signatures or pattern files or threat intel, whatever you call it, needs to be available for you to be able to detect it. So detection is really the phase that you can reduce a lot by using more automatic controls. And likewise, same is true for automatic responses. If it takes you days to detect, then having an automatic response almost doesn't matter anymore because it took so long for initial detection. So the better automatic response is enacted automatically after a machine-based detection has occurred. However, relatively weak systems like EDR 1.0 systems typically don't really, or people typically don't run them as automatic responses because there's a high false positive count associated with them. So stronger approaches to automatic responses are the ones that can rely on a high signal-to-noise ratio already in the system created detection, so that you can even afford to create an automatic response. So automatic responses are something that you need to have in place if you want to have the fastest possible response, which gives you a first dip at containment, but it requires that the system is up for it. Then you need to alert. Weaker approaches require a lot of human work in order to sort alerts and prioritize them. There's a lot of alert fatigue. When you look at the MITRE test, like last year's MITRE test, then what you see is that there were some systems that created like 140 alerts for 140 steps. That's great because you have good coverage, but it's not so great because it means that for all sorts of benign behavior, you will have alerts as well, and then people will need to sift through them, and then they will become tired of all the alerts, and they will become unable to tell the ones that are relevant from the ones that are irrelevant. So systems should provide that automated prioritization and also grouping of related incidents for you already. Then you need to identify what's going on. And the weaker approaches rely on a very intense human element. to do this initial analysis. So they require you to do like following PIDs, following attackers across systems, rather than automatically correlating these things for you and putting them in one big incident alert so that you can understand what's going on and also constantly understand what is now still going on, because you're in the midst of an incident. So there's potentially new actions that need to be correlated into it. So the stronger approaches provide you with an identifiable, understandable incident view that already has an actionable detection. So pre-correlation, really important. That's true for investigation as well. Like when you start to understand what's going on, then understaffing is what you hear a lot from folks as their concern. And what that really means is that they typically have to switch between a number of different tools, some for forensics, some for threat hunting, some for AV, so that they can enact responses or understand what other things have occurred. Sometimes that's done in a SIEM, sometimes that's done outside. But typically, you save a lot of time if you put all the relevant information in one place and it's naturally there. So if there's an automatic correlation and it's not you building it on top of a SIEM. So that's an aspect where automatic correlation is really helpful and automatic analysis is really helpful because it saves you time and gives you more accuracy. And then you enact manual responses, and manual responses come in different forms. They come in the form of clicking a button telling you, hey, roll back all of the actions from that particular timeline. That's something that SentinelOne does. They also come in the form of manual scripting, where folks have to develop scripts themselves to clean up what an attacker did. And that's very time-consuming. It's very error-prone. It requires lots of design, test run, then clean-up cycles in order to understand what you're doing. So what humans should be doing is they should decide on the response. They should not need to author it, to design it. So the easier it is for them to perform an undo of attacker operations, the faster you are with containment. And the easier it is, incidentally, to also verify what has occurred. Because if you're getting a report that says, hey, we could roll back all of these changes, we could remediate all of those for instance, persistence points, and that's a lot more useful than you having to parse the output of a script you just wrote and trying to understand whether it succeeded or not. So the more automation you have in performing the manual response, the better it will be, the easier it will be for you to verify the containment. Also, if you have a short retention time span for threat hunting data, and you go search for, has the attacker been here, what did they do 30 days ago, what did they do 60 days ago, then if your system doesn't support that kind of query going that long back, then you're not going to be able to verify what they did before they became visible to you. So verifying containment depends on having a longer retention time span and also correlating new alerts into the existing incidents. And I think we've improved a lot over the past few years with time to containment. Like EDR technologies have really helped us to become more effective, but still 69 days mean time to contain a breach after identification. So if you add that to the 197 from the beginning, that's really a lot of time. And Mandiant has a slightly different number, 56 versus 69, but you get two numbers that really aren't doing us justice as an industry, and I think we can get better if we optimize every step along the way. And now there's a few things that I haven't mentioned despite working for a vendor. Like I haven't told you about awesome artificial intelligence and machine learning and threat intelligence and all of these things because, frankly, I don't care anymore. All of these are means to the same end. They're all means to get to the point where we can respond quickly and where we can be sure that we contain quickly. And I don't care about whether the technology is magic or artificial intelligence or whether it's threat intelligence. Whatever brings me to having optimal time to containment is the right technology choice for me or for your organization. And we can talk about those buzzwords and geek out about them at any time, and I'm really happy to do that. But let's keep the objective in mind, that the objective is keeping time to containment low. So to summarize, I think there are 5 things that we need to do. We need to care about automation. Machine speed is more important than human speed. Whenever we can automate a process, whenever we can automate a response, we should be doing it. Autonomy. I don't want to rely on prior knowledge to be able to detect a threat, because that means I will lose minutes, weeks, days to first detect a threat that exists in my environment. Automatic correlation means that analysts save time and it's more actionable for them to respond. And an end-to-end integrated process that has all of the events from A/B down to threat hunting in one place makes me more effective, and it helps me put everything in one platform, which reduces the number of both context changes in analysis, but also allows me to put all the responses, like from device control, killing, quarantining, to network level controls like isolation, do it in one platform. And in the end, what that does is it will empower us in the SOC, it will empower us in the cyber defense centers, and it will allow us to provide optimum time to contain and therefore best mitigation to the organizations we work for. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I hope you'll have a great conference, and I really look forward to meeting you in person next time. Thank you very much.